remember a time when you could get a bind and fly 5-inch Freestyle drone, and not like a cheap little cut rate China special that's going to fall apart, a really good one for about $200. Well, I guess I must have found a freaking time machine, because this right here is an iFlight Nazgul, and it doesn't cost $270 like the Nazgul V3, which is already a pretty good price in this day and age. It costs just over $200. That's 2019 pricing in 2024. So, like, how do they do it? And how many corners did they cut? And how freaking good could it really be at that price? Because frankly, if it's any freaking good, then at that price, it's pretty freaking good. You know what I mean? I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're gonna learn something. I can't do it, guys. The way that a better YouTuber than me would make this video would be to suggest that because of this drone's low price, it must suck in some way, and then go through the whole video teasing you, making you think that I was going to reveal how it sucks. And then at the end of the video, I'd be like, no, actually, it's amazing. I fooled you. But I just don't, that just feel dirty. And the truth is that this quadcopter is it's an iFlight bind and fly. iFlight makes great bind and fly quadcopters. So the big question is, how do they get it as cheap as it is? And the answer, I think, is massive volume. iFlight makes so many quadcopters. They make a ridiculous number of quadcopters. And so they can take the flight controller, the ESC, and the motors that they're making tens or maybe even more of thousands of, and they can put those in a drone. And they have cut a few corners and made a few compromises here compared to their more expensive bind and flies. But the bottom line is that a $200-ish drone from iFlight is going to be way, way better than a $200 drone from a smaller company that puts out maybe only a few hundreds or thousands of bind and flies a year. And that means basically you're getting great value for your money. The frame on the Nazgul Eco isn't going to win any awards for innovation. That's not what it's trying to do. It is a really bog standard freestyle frame from the, say, 2020 to 2022 time frame. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's also not really impressive in any particular way either. The bottom plate of the quad is a single piece with detachable arms. The arms are held in with 2 screws. It looks like they might be held in with 3 screws, but there's actually a slit here to allow this screw, which is holding the flight control stack, to stay in place so that you can remove these 2 screws and just slide the arm out if you break an arm and need to change it. You don't have to disassemble the flight control stack in order to change the arm, and that's a good thing. That's just like a total deal breaker for me on a frame, and it's good that iFlight haven't done that. Speaking of broken arms, you are going to experience broken arms. These arms are 5mm thick, which once upon a time, that was the innovation. Arms used to be 3mm thick, and people started doing 5mm, and they're like, oh, thicker, it's so much more durable. But these days, 5mm is pretty much the bottom of what you would find acceptable, and you're seeing manufacturers do 6 or even 7, or in some cases even 8mm arms for like things like the Rotor Riot tank that are focused on durability above all else. Anybody who's flown an iFlight Nazgul in the last couple of years, including me, knows that this is where the arm is going to break. The arm is just not very wide from this dimension, and it's not very tall from the other dimension, and therefore, when it takes a hit, eventually it breaks off. You're going to want spare arms if you buy this quadcopter. Before we get any further in the video, let's pull these tags off. I wanted to leave these tags on because I think it's really great that iFlight puts all these helpful warnings for people who are just getting into FPV and don't already know the things that you and I already know if we've been in FPV for a long time. Like this warning here, which says to never plug in the battery without the antenna installed, or the video transmitter will burn out. The quadcopter does come with the antenna not installed for shipping, and It's nice that they warn you not to do that. And this warning here, which says, I'm an iFlight pre-tuned bind and fly, just bind and fly. Well, it's not going to be that simple. There is some setup to do. And in fact, I'm going to be making a setup video for this very same quadcopter. If you are going to buy it, I'll put a link in the video description below to where you can also see the setup video. But the warning does stand. A lot of people get a new bind and fly quadcopter and they think that the next thing they should do is update the firmware because sometimes it doesn't ship with the very latest firmware. Please resist that temptation. The iFlight tech support people get so many calls from people, they don't realize that when you flash Betaflight to a new version, it wipes the configuration of the drone completely out. It's not like your phone that says, hey, there's a firmware update. Want me to do it in the middle of the night while you're sleeping? Cool. And then you wake up the next morning and your phone's just like it was, except it has a new firmware on it with some security fixes or whatever. When you flash Betaflight, you wipe out the configuration completely, and then your drone doesn't work anymore. So if you buy this, just enjoy it the way that it is. Don't think that you have to flash it right off the bat to the very, very latest. The flight controller and ESC are one of the places where iFlight have cut those corners in order to bring the price down. Instead of using the STM32 chips that are on most flight controllers that we've been buying for the last frickin' 5-8 years, this one uses chips from a company called Artery. And it is an AT32 chip instead of an STM32 chip. And without going into too many details, it is a lot less expensive than an STM32 chip and is still basically the same functionality. One of the limitations of the AT32 chip is that you must be using Betaflight Configurator 10.10 and you must be using Betaflight 4.5 or newer, which is presumably what this ships with. As far as the ESC goes, the corner that was cut is that this is only an 8-bit ESC, not a 32-bit ESC. But that's actually not as big of a deal as it sounds like. Firmwares like BlueJay can get exceptional performance out of 8-bit ESCs, in some cases even better performance than 32-bit ESCs. The main thing you lose by going to an 8-bit ESC is a little bit of flexibility. With 32-bit ESCs, you can change all kinds of parameters like the PWM frequency. You can just change those things in software. You don't have to do like reflash new firmware. With BlueJay, if you want to make those changes, you'll be reflashing the ESC instead of just going in and changing a parameter. BlueJay these days is actually better for a lot of people than BLHeli32 because BLHeli32 just closed up shop and went out of business. And BLHeli32 is closed source. So everybody with the BLHeli32 ESC right now can't flash it to a new version. They're just stuck with whatever they've got. But people with 8-bit ESCs, the 8-bit code was open source. They're like they're fine. They're just doing their thing. If you want to hear more about that, I've actually got a video about BLHeli32 closing down. What does it mean for you as the owner of a BLHeli32 ESC, and what should you do next? And I'll put a link to that video in the video description below as well. In order to keep the price as low as possible, we are going with an analog build. This is the analog video transmitter. It's the iFlight RAD, and it is a 1.6 watt video transmitter. These days, that 1.6 watt metric is pretty much the top of the line for consumer video transmitters. That 1.6 watt number is still technically above the 1 watt maximum that the FCC requires, but somehow that's what video transmitter manufacturers decided they're going to do. They're going to sell these as 1.6 watts. Here we've got the Immersion RC RF power meter. Don't let the fact that it has Rotor Riot branding on it fool you. They just did a little partnership thing where they made one with a Rotor Riot logo on it a little while back. And this is a $100 device that performs the job of a multi-thousand or tens of thousands of dollars device in measuring RF power. It doesn't do it as precisely or accurately as a full-fledged RF spectrum analyzer power meter that costs $50,000, but it does it kind of good enough on the bench to tell us whether our output power is in the ballpark. So we're going to power up this video transmitter, and if it reads 1.6 watts, that's good. And if it reads 1.4 watts or 1.2 watts, that's still like in the ballpark of correct, and we'll kind of chalk it up to this meter. But if it reads something radically different, then it might indicate that there's something wrong with the power of the video transmitter. Here we go. Moment of truth. Budding. Yeah. 1.45, 1.5 watts. That's right in the ballpark of the 1.6 watts that they advertise, and that's great. It suggests that we shouldn't have any problems with video range on this video transmitter. It's a small thing, but I love that they have connected the antenna mount to this 3D printed piece using 2 extra screws. A lot of times they'll just have a nut that goes down over the SMA, and the problem is that as you tighten down the SMA antenna, that nut twists and spins, and eventually the antenna wire twists around and spirals around and breaks off. That cannot happen here when we've got these 2 screws holding it in. And that's just, I want all my video transmitters to be this way. I can come down and I can crank this. Well, I'm not going to damage it, but I can theoretically crank it as much as I want, and it will not twist off the wire. Oh yeah, that's good and secure. Continuing the trend of I have no idea where they cut the corners to get the price down, they've even included this anti-spark device. This anti-spark device, you know how sometimes you plug in your battery and it goes pop? And then eventually sometimes maybe you'll even notice some like soot or singeing or arcing on the XT60 connector, where that spark is basically burning your XT60 connector. This anti-spark device prevents that. And I know it's not that expensive, but like I'm thinking they'd be cutting costs wherever they could. Apparently not. Finally, we come to the motors, and they are, no surprise, the Xing-E Pro 2207. 2207 is a perfectly good size for a 5-inch prop, and 1800 kV is a perfectly good kV for a 5-inch freestyle drone. But what makes these motors so special is just how freaking well made they are compared to other motors in their price point. Like, for example, this is a unibell. That means that there is a single piece of metal that has been machined into this bell, as opposed to having the top of the bell be machined and the outer part of the bell just being kind of like a cylinder of metal that is sort of pressed in. Unibell motors, some people argue they're more durable. Some people argue they're less durable. I'm not going to weigh in on that. But there's no question that Unibell is more expensive to machine and just gives a nicer, more premium feel to the motor. The windings are thick single-strand wire and really nicely wrapped. This motor blows me away. This is like a $15 motor. And it compares favorably to $20 or $22 motors that are out there. And that's going to matter. Like right now, you're not buying motors, you're buying a quadcopter, but you're going to break the motors and you're going to buy spares. And when you buy spares, you're going to be getting a hell of a good value for your money with these Xing-E Pro motors. This is a little hard for me to catch on camera because the motor is getting dark, but if you look right here, you can see that the motor screws are sticking up maybe as much as 1 millimeter above the base of the motor. And in this case, that screw is coming up and it is contacting the wires that are coming out of the motor windings. That's not a problem today because those wires have insulation on them. Over time, especially if you have TPU arm protectors out on the end, these things have some flex and give in them. The screws can start to work loose. You tighten the screw. It works loose. You tighten the screw. And that back and forth motion eventually can cut through the motor wires. This is a case where like my personal best practice for my builds would be do not do this. You do not want the screws protruding above the base of the motor more than maybe like 0.5 millimeter, if at all, and you don't want them in contact with the wires. However, iFlight sells a freaking lot of these things, and if they were falling out of the air with dead motors because the screws, then they probably would not build them this way. So I have to probably defer to iFlight's experience and huge number of drones built, but personally, I don't like it. I don't like it. All right, well, now I'm going to take it over there. I'm going to configure it in Betaflight, get it all set up, and then I'm going to take it out and fly it. The setup is going to be another video. If you want to watch that part, it's linked in the video description below. And if you want to just keep watching this video, the next thing you're going to see is me flying it. Good? Y'all good? The number of satellites we're locking is not spectacular. 7 sats locked. I've seen Betaflight get like 20 sats locked with an M10 GPS. But our HDOP is 1.0, which is extraordinarily good, so I don't know what to make of all that. Let's fly. Yeah. She flies pretty good, boys. This is with a GoPro on too, so we get a little more punch and save a little more weight by taking the GoPro off. Whee! Corner's real nice. Really just get on the throttle. Ooh, a little too responsive there. Can't help but notice we haven't locked our sats yet. Doesn't speak well for the performance of the GPS unit. Woo! Every time I fly analog or HD0, I'm impressed at how my reflexes get better because the lower latency of the camera. Now, I don't know what the actual latency of this camera is, but I find myself like just seeing a gap and diving into it. Like right up here, I just kind of went, whoa, we'll just go here. And then we'll just go there, sure, why not? And I just kind of don't care. I'm just reacting to what I see in front of me instead of planning. And I like it. Oh, wasn't going to make that one. Oh, no, she's down. Hello, GoPro. You. Oh, that's a shame. The freaking 3D printed GoPro mount literally just ripped off. Yeah. Oops. Just ripped off. Okay, so that thing is useless. Wow, what a shitty way to just lose a GoPro. That's extraordinary. Like, I can't even conceive of that. Like, why did that happen? I'm gonna have to look into that. Like, if it has something to do with the way it was printed, I don't know, but that's shocking. Like, that it could be so easily damaged. And losing a GoPro is like a big freaking deal. I guess we're gonna be DVR only from here on out. Ah, well, that's analog for you. Where'd that branch come from? I don't know. I didn't see it. Oh, there it was again. Let's take a look at the aftermath of the test flights. And I guess the first thing that we'll point out is that the GoPro mount kind of sucked. Like, I don't really know what happened here. I mean, granted, this is TPU, so TPU will stretch and tear eventually, but like, I've had a lot of GoPro mounts like this, and I've never had one do this before. Makes me think that there's something wrong either with the printing or the design. I don't know. I don't like this kind of mount anyway. I don't like mounting with these little tabs. It doesn't hold the angle consistently. The GoPro will get knocked and will change angles during flight, and it can just come off. I prefer a GoPro mount where the GoPro slides into a sleeve, and I'm sure that if I looked hard enough, I would find one of them that I could print. Anyway, moving on. The print is questionable. The buzzer is in this little 3D printed thing here. At least it was in there. It came out twice during a crash. It is not put in there securely enough. It will just pop out. I don't know exactly the best way to fix this. Maybe put some tape around it to add a little friction, or even use some glue like E6000 or rubber cement to hold it in there. I still like the buzzer, and I like the way the buzzer is mounted. I just think it needs to be secured a little better. Even like a zip tie going over the top to hold it in place would be acceptable. That's easy enough to fix after you buy the quadcopter, and I would recommend, if you buy this quadcopter, that you do find some way to secure the buzzer. I am not a big fan of cameras that mount with a single screw. I prefer cameras that mount with two screws so that you can lock in the camera angles and the camera doesn't move in a crash. When you've got a camera that's mounted with one screw, no matter how tightly you screw it down, especially because these have soft mounting, although for analog cameras, soft mounting doesn't really matter, but it matters for digital cameras with image stabilization. Especially when you've got soft mounting, you really can't get the screws tight enough that the camera will hold angle. I had this camera change angle in a crash, and it's really annoying when you take off and suddenly you're going way faster than you were before because your camera angle is shifted, or vice versa. I don't think there's a really great fix for this. Even if we were to use separate 3D printed inserts for the front here with 2 screw holes, which you could theoretically do, the camera doesn't have 2 screws. So there needs to be some other way to hold the angle of the camera. That's not like a deal breaker, but it is going to be annoying the more you live with the quadcopter. This is how the video antenna finished the last flight, and I gotta say, I'm actually really impressed. Because of the 2 screws here, it is completely secure. I was able to cinch this down tight enough that it didn't go anywhere. It hasn't loosened at all. And yeah, it's bent, but we just bend it back and we're good as new. This coaxial cable appears to be it's called semi-rigid coax. It's not floppy like this stuff. It's not floppy like this stuff. It'll hold its shape. And that lets you bend it into whatever shape you want, and it kind of stays there, except then in a crash, it bends a different direction and it stays there. The only thing wrong with semi-rigid coax is that over time, the metal sheath that gives it its rigidity, as you bend it, it breaks. And it can break inside the insulation, and you don't know that it's broken off. It most often happens here at the base. So if you notice with an antenna like this that suddenly you're getting much, much worse range and you have no idea why, it could be damaged internally, and you should just try to get a new antenna. You know what made me decide to review this quadcopter? I saw an iFlight quadcopter for $200. I looked at the specs, and the specs all checked all the boxes, and I thought, this thing is going to be great, and I just need to tell the world about it. Because I know you guys are out there, and you're trying to save money. You're trying to get the best value for your money. And I was pretty sure, shouldn't I be completely objective and unbiased? I was pretty sure going into this that this was going to be really good value for money. And now we've come to the end of the video, and basically, I was right. iFlight has done it again. No, this quadcopter isn't perfect. We could wish maybe that the arms were more durable. These arms are going to break, especially if you fly in concrete, bando, asphalt, someplace other than a nice, soft, grassy field to fall into. They're going to break. That's what's going to break on the frame. The motors are great. We could nitpick things like the buzzer placement. The video transmitter's great. The camera is not bad. The image of the camera is great. The whole thing is really good, especially at a price of $200. So if you are interested in picking one up, there are links in the video description below. That's my other motivation for doing this video. When I do a review of a product and then you decide to buy the product, if you use those links down in the video description, I get a little bit of money. It's called affiliate marketing. And basically, as long as you feel like I'm steering you right, you keep coming back to my channel and buying things I recommend. And then I keep getting a little bit of money. And hopefully that's a mutually beneficial relationship. Well, my end of the relationship is I tell you about great products. Your end of the relationship is that you go click those links in the video description below. Even if you don't buy this exact product, whenever you go shopping at iFlight store or any store I have an affiliate relationship with, you can just click the affiliate links. You can even bookmark them and just go to the store. I get a little commission. It's a great way for you to support the channel. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Either the store keeps the money or they give it to me. I'd rather they give it to me. So affiliate links are down there if you want to pick this up. And if you're looking for a 5-inch bind and fly quadcopter, there could be things about other quadcopters you look at and you go, "Ooh, I want that. I want to go buy a GEP-RC Mark V, or maybe you want to buy an iFlight Evoke instead of the Nazgul, but you're going to pay $70 to $100 to $150 more to get something that objectively is not that much different." But look, as good as this bind and fly quadcopter is, you can't buy bind and fly quadcopters for the rest of your life. What happens when they crash and you break them and you don't know how to fix them? How are you going to learn how to fix them? You're going to build your own. You're going to build your own quadcopter, and you're going to do it using my beginner build series, a series of videos to take you from a pile of parts on the bench to a fully built quadcopter that you can fly. And I'm going to walk you through every step of the way, building, configuring, and the initial flight. If you're interested in doing that, here is a link to the playlist where I tell you more about it. And if you're not sure, if you're like on the fence, you can go start watching the videos in the playlist and check it out, see what's involved. In fact, even if you don't buy that kit, it's your money. But even if you don't buy that kit, you can still use those videos as a great tutorial for how to set up a quadcopter. I highly recommend it. I'll put that card on screen if you want to go check that out. See you there.